Good afternoon. Welcome to Lunch with Books. Thanks for braving the stormy conditions. A lot of people, as I understand, did not make it today because of the rain. But our guest came all the way from the middle of Ohio, so we welcome him. If you would turn off your cell phones, please. And before we start, I'm going to bring up our friend Chuck Julian from Friends of the Library.
Thank you, Sean. It's a pleasure to be with you again today, here to promote the Friends of the Ohio County Public Library. Reminding people that tonight at 6 o'clock is our annual membership meeting right here in the auditorium of the library. We have membership forms. If any of you are interested in joining, it's $10 a year. We also are promoting our drawing, which will happen next week at the Lunch with Books program. We think we've got about $400 worth of merchandise now. We have a bottle of wine. We have several gift certificates, including Later Gator and the Belgian Waffle Shop. We've got a couple books. We've got a throw. We've got a candle. We've got puzzles. We've got a book journal. We've got library socks. So it's a great collection of things, which we will do the drawing next week. So and also importantly, in 4 weeks, the primary election the early voting will begin, and we all know that the library levy, I'm speaking as a private citizen now, the library levy will be on the ballot, and we hope that you and your neighbors will encourage everyone to vote for the levy. Thank you, Sean.
Hey, thanks, Chuck. I just wanted to mention that the new historical review is available for $6. And I have the books for the Book of Quint. If you're a fan of Jaws, this is a prequel to Jaws about Quint. And he'll be here, the author, in June 18th. And so we have the books for $19. This Thursday, the Eclipse event with Smart Center, which starts when? 6 p.m. So learn about how to look at the eclipse without burning your eyeballs out. And then our book sale will be April 12 and 13. Is that correct? Yeah. Okay. Next week we have Rico, who's the ambassador dog, who's written a book. He sniffed out landmines in Bosnia-Herzegovina, so he's a hero. And you can meet Rico right here on the stage next week. And the week after that, another author from Ohio University Press, Stuart Welsh, about Appalachian fishes. So that'll be April 16th. Now today, if you're looking for related books in the library, I think the call numbers are 750 to 800 for foraging and mushrooms, etc. But we have with us Walt Sturgeon. He's a field mycologist with over 40 years of experience studying and identifying mushrooms. Now he has these 2 books. The larger one is $30, and the field guide is $15. So here he is, Walter Sturgeon.
Thank you. Appreciate you all showing up on this miserable day out there. But April showers bring up May mushrooms, so this is a good thing. So, okay, I'm going to get started. Can you hear me everywhere? Well, maybe I need to get closer. Okay, I won't lick the microphone. Okay, I'm going to show you 2 pictures of an actual mushroom organism. Mushrooms are fungi. So you have a cheese sandwich and a cup of wine. You've got 3 fungi working on all 3 of those ingredients. So they do involve themselves in your life. But those are fungi that don't produce a fruiting body. This is the organism. We call it mycelium or spawn. And when temperature's right and conditions are right, whoops, it throws up a fruiting body. And just like your mushroom you buy in the store does. So this is what we're looking at are the fruit, the reproductive structure of a fungus, of a fleshy fungus. I like to call them macrofungi. Most fungi do not have fruiting bodies. They fruit right from the mycelium. My point here, other than it's a little brown mushroom, is that you can pick this mushroom, any mushroom, and if the conditions are favorable, you can return to the same spot probably at the same time of year, and you can find the mushroom. So picking it does not harm the organism. In fact, it may stimulate the organism to produce more mushrooms. So unlike green plants, which you can't really just pick all the ramps you want, you could decimate the population. So anyhow, hard to define a fungus. Basically, it's an organism that lacks chlorophyll by either being a recycler, living on dead material, or being a parasite, attacking living material, or being a symbiont, forming what we call mycorrhiza. Myco means fungus, rhiza means root, and the roots of a tree get enveloped with the fungus, and the fungus provides nutrients to the tree. It's more complicated than this. The tree provides carbohydrates because the mushroom can't produce its own food, so it's dependent on the tree. The tree provides carbohydrates because the mushroom can't produce its own food, so it's dependent on the tree. This is another look at mycelium. Mostly it's white or yellow. And this is another look at mycelium. Not an edible mushroom particularly, probably not very poisonous. Most mushrooms are not deadly poisonous. We have maybe 3 or 4 in Ohio that would. And some mushrooms grow on the sides of trees, and they don't really have a stem to lift those gills up off the ground. They're already off the ground. Some mushrooms grow on the sides of trees, and they don't really have. And mushrooms that you buy in the store, and a lot of the mushrooms or the woods have what we call a partial veil, and you can see it on the left, just starting to pull away from the margin of the cap, and on the right you can see it's totally pulled away, leaving a ring on the stem. Its function is to keep the gills moist. Mushrooms like moisture until the spores are mature, and then it opens up so it can reproduce. Pull away from the margin of the cap, and on the right you can see it here, pulled away, leaving a ring on the stem. Mostly everything I'm showing you, be in my Appalachian field guide over there, and the Northeast guide is also quite fitting for here. You can't put everything in a book. And some mushrooms have what we call a universal veil. They said they couldn't hear me. Can you hear me now? Thank you. You turned it down, if that makes any sense. Anyhow, the universal veil, called a vulva, and you can see the one on the left. I guess you just have the one on the left, is coming out of an egg-like structure called a vulva. And it'll open up further, and there'll be a partial veil on it. So it has 2 ways to keep itself, keep those gills moist. This is called Caesar's amanita, American Caesar's mushroom. Allegedly, Caesar liked to eat this. And the variety in Europe is very popular, just eaten raw with olive oil. Allegedly, Caesar liked that's just a note that most mushrooms consider them poisonous if they're not cooked. There are very few wild mushrooms that you're going to eat raw. And that structure at the bottom of the stem is important for you to collect. Get the bottom of the stem. That way you can see what you have. If you cut that off, you might mistake this mushroom for something else. And if you did, it would kill you. So it kills more, probably poisons and kills more people in North America than any other mushroom. It has a second cousin that's green, does the same thing. White cap, white gills, white vulva, white stem, a skirt-like white ring that hangs down, not like a ring on your finger, but more like a skirt. Some umbrella-shaped mushrooms do not have gills. They've got pores. There's little tubes where the spores are produced inside the mushroom. Now, if you take a gilled mushroom and lay it down on a piece of aluminum foil, cover it with a bowl, and come back the next day or a few hours later, microscopic spores will accumulate by the millions, and they will leave what we call a spore deposit. The color of that spore deposit will be key when you're looking in your field guide. And they come in everything green, almost black, to white, yellow, and so forth. This is a bolete, which is what we call the ones that grow on mostly on wood, mostly on the ground, and they have pores. There are a lot of pored mushrooms that grow on wood. This is a bolete. Most of those we call the ones that grow polypores. Mostly on the ground. And boletes are symbiotic. They are mycorrhizal with a variety of trees. And then the hedgehogs, Hydnum repandum group. They've got spines hanging down underside of the cap. This is a less common group of mushrooms. This one happens to be very edible. Okay, it's the time of year when we can talk about morels. Has anybody found any yet? I see a half-hearted hand go up back there. How many did you get? Not very many, she says. Well, morels are so popular, they're the most popular edible mushroom in North America. Now, there might be differences in other countries. If you went out today, you'd be looking for this one mostly. It's called the black morel because the ridges turn black in age. Sometimes with tulip poplar, ash, elm, any place that's been burned or fertilized with ashes is a good place for morels. And this one's called the half-free morel because the cap does not attach to the stem at the bottom. It forms like a skirt hanging down. So, and I grew up with a more colorful name of dogpecker, but you won't find that in many books. It's in some of them. This is the one that we'd like to find, a so-called common morel. I wish they would tell me where it's common. I have found as many as 95 under one tree, but that's a lifetime accomplishment. So this particular one in the Ohio River Valley likes to grow under elms that have just died and the bark's still hanging to the tree, starting to slough off. Now, morels, I may surprise you to tell you they're actually poisonous. If you ate them raw, you'd be in trouble. And as a chef found out in British Columbia, when he served 50 people morels on a salad, and they were all raw, and I can imagine that banquet hall restroom got busy. I don't know how you cook your morels. I'm pretty simple, although I do one step beyond just sauteing them. You want to saute them till they're done, not half raw, not cooked like you want them to make sure they're done. Cut them vertically, soak them briefly. You don't want to soak them for hours and hours and hours, or just spray them with a spray hose and get them good and dry. Coat them with a little bit of flour, don't overdo it, and then cook them in whatever oil you choose. I like a mixture of butter and olive oil. Now, there are false morels, which I've never seen this one in Ohio. I have one report of it from West Virginia, and it's a bad one if you're thinking about eating it, although the name esculenta kind of means it's esculent. But if you wanted to eat it, and I don't recommend this, you boil it, throw off the water, boil it again, throw off the water, and don't breathe the steam coming off the mushrooms. I have heard a rumor of one people having a basket full in their car, and they got sick from the fumes of the mushroom. So, pretty toxic. It contains what we call monomethylhydrazine, which is NASA uses that in its partly in its fuel for space shuttles. Fortunately, you're not going to likely to find it. grows with conifers. I have a friend of mine has found it in West Virginia. I've never seen it in Ohio in 45 years. This one you find looks a lot the same. And once you can tell the difference, like a morel, you can cook the heck out of this one and it's very good. It can get pretty large. And this is another one that you can eat if you cook it thoroughly. But I would avoid them all until you're really familiar with all the species. Okay, this section is distinctive edibles that you can identify probably from a picture. You got to read the stuff too next to the picture, but there aren't many mushrooms that look like sulfur yellow on the underside, orange on top. No gills. It's got very small pores. Anyway, you cook chicken, you can cook this mushroom. The texture is like chicken, not the taste. And there's a white form, has white pores, it's just as good or even better. Okay, many of you don't think about hunting fungi in your garden, but you might go out there trying to pick corn and you see this. Before it turns black and smeary, this is considered a delicacy in Mexico, and I've eaten it. It's quite good. You throw some in a skillet with some oil or butter, put some green pepper in, some onion in, and some corn. And then you've got it. Just fry it up. I wouldn't recommend getting it canned. I don't think we would like that, but fresh is pretty good. I have a farmer's market, a couple of them that I've gone to and said, do you know what this is? And if I say the name, they say, yes. I said, I'd like to buy it from you if you find it. None of them have called me back. I think they think I'm crazy. So anyhow, maybe I am crazy, but those white things you see there are aborted kernels on the cob. Another distinctive edible, although there are two sort of similar mushrooms, both wouldn't hurt you. This is the hen of the woods, or sometimes in the Ohio Valley, it's called a sheephead. And if you're an Italian person, you might call it nusk. And it's very firm, chewy, does not get soft in spaghetti sauce, which is one reason it's probably popular. Good edible. I wouldn't call it great, but it's good. Some people make jerky out of it. Now, if your mushroom hunting is pretty much limited to town and you don't get out in the woods much, this is one you're likely to find. It's a very good edible, but it's delicate. It's not real strong flavored, and you can find it in fields, edges of the woods, often from buried wood. The catch with this one is you got to eat it the day you pick it, soon after you pick it. If you take it home and pick it and put it in or pick it and take it home and put it in your fridge, I guess I don't have another picture of it. My flash drive with my programs on it got corrupted, so I'm dealing with a less familiar flash drive. Anyhow, it will liquefy from the bottom up. It never flattens out, literally dripping ink. Here's a good look at that partial veil on a wine cap stropharia, which is a mushroom that's kind of shown up in the eastern North America only in the last 30 years. When I started mushrooming, I had a wood chip flower garden in the nearby library, and I picked a bunch of these, took them home, going to identify them. It wasn't in the book. And yet, it was pretty common in that one habitat. Well, I think what happened is somebody brought it in on wood chips, wood mulch, and it has since expanded. I found some in Anchorage, Alaska a couple years ago. Very good edible, very distinctive with that ring with a kind of like gill-like ridges on top of the ring and those claw-like hooks on the underside. There's another look at the top. And this is probably the most popular mushroom in Europe. This is the porcini, cep, steinpilz, depending on what ethnic group you follow. And if you buy these dried, you may be getting 3 or 4 different species that are all delicious. They have white pores turning yellow, and the cap is a little bit tacky if you touch it. I was lucky enough to find about 10 pounds of these under two trees in a cemetery last year. Not real common unless you got spruce trees. And under oak, we have the second cousin. It's not sticky, it's dry or moist, and it has oak, grows with oak mostly, or beech. As does this one, which can be dark purple all the way to liver colored, and grows with oak or hemlock. And then there's the chanterelles. These are for eating purposes. First off, they only look alike, and it is the false chanterelle, and that one won't hurt you. The other look-alike is a jack-o'-lantern, which will make you sick. I will show pictures of that. You treat this one more like a fruit than you would a mushroom or a vegetable. It's got a smell of apricots or fruitiness. I've eaten it in sorbet, ice cream. You can do a lot with this mushroom. It's quite good and very popular. There's several species. And once you know it's a chanterelle, which means it doesn't have real gills, it might have flat, ridged type gills, or it might be smooth like this one. One thing I do when I go to the West Virginia mushroom foray, which I recommend some of you Google if you're interested in seeing 100 or more kinds of mushrooms all identified. I take a $12 bottle of vodka, pour it into a peanut butter jar, stick 5 or 6 chanterelles in there, and let them sit overnight, and then take the mushrooms out and get $30 at a Chinese auction for these mushrooms, for that vodka rather. It tastes like, to me, it tastes like fruit. A less commonly consumed mushroom in West Virginia and Ohio, but becoming more popular, are the milk mushrooms. There's a couple different genera of these, and some of them drip really hard when you scratch the gills. And I don't like general rules for eating mushrooms, but I haven't seen anyone break this one yet. If you get milk coming out of a short, squat mushroom, take your tongue and lap it up. And if it's mild and sweet, then you take it home and eat it. If it's hotter than the hottest pepper, you might think twice about doing that, or boil it. So, and this is a mild tasting one, as is this one, which the West Virginia name for this is Bradley. I have no idea why. See, the gills are pretty close together. It's edible. Smells like fish. Doesn't cook up like fish, and you got to cook it till it's like bacon, crisp. Similar as this one, but you notice the gills are distant. They're far apart. And a third cousin is the corrugated mushroom. Sometimes you can see wrinkles on the outside of the cap, and it's a much more darker species. Sometimes the gills are even dark. Okay, back to the spine fungi, the tooth fungi. This one grows on wood. It's a good edible. It has 2 or 3 similar species, all of which are good edibles. They have common names that I can never keep straight. Sometimes I look at it like a stalactite mushroom, but it can be bear's head, lion's mane for each of the species, and I just prefer to use the scientific name. Here's one in the same genus, looks like coral. And there were lots of it on this log. And this one's mostly flesh, but it does have spines. Very good. None of these are super common, but you'll see them every year if you're out in the woods. And then we have the puffballs. Any puffball with a skin that's not hard, firm but not hard, is edible if it's young. You cut it in half, and if you see any discoloration, it's going to be bitter. But if it's white inside, you can eat puffballs if you want to. In my opinion, they taste like tofu, so don't get too excited about them, but you can cook them with other things like tofu, and they'll absorb the flavors. And they get pretty big. Not my photo, but a great photo just the same. And many years ago, I went out with a reporter when I was just starting this hobby, and the reporter and I were lucky enough to find, not that big, but we found a giant puffball. And being a reporter and a bit of an artist, he turned it into art. He found it in a cemetery. Mushrooms can get quite large, certain species, particularly in the tropical, subtropical regions. This is agaricus, the genus of your store-bought mushrooms, at least two of them, three of them, cremini, common white mushroom, portobello, they're all agaricus. This is agaricus, probably campestris, but I'm not going to say for sure, but if they're young and you're in the east, you can eat any of them. I wouldn't eat the ones that stain red, but those are uncommon. I just don't know much about those. And I mentioned the destroying angel. Here it is again. That's why I don't call these idiot-proof mushrooms. You got to do a little bit of reading. But you cut that stem off and it gets tough to identify them. Another deadly mushroom we have, which is still out and been out most of the winter. Fall and spring are the times to find it. The little brown mushroom, we call them LBMs. And they grow on wood. They're not particularly appealing. They're not particularly large. The problem is people are gathering edible mushrooms on wood, and sometimes they grow on the same log at the same time. And you stick a couple of these in by mistake. So pay attention. And the edible honey mushroom, which is a likely misidentification, has a white spore deposit. This one has a brown spore deposit. Okay, this is a kind of an interesting group of fungi. They're carnivorous, or better, mostly insectivorous. How many of you have seen the movie The Last of Us, The End of Us? Okay, a video game with the same name. They transfer this ability to parasitize to humans, which is not really, other than other fungi like athlete's foot, it's not a common phenomenon to find a cordyceps on a person. This one grows on insect larvae and pupae that are buried. So if you find the club and you dig up the bottom of the stem, which you do with any mushroom until you know for sure what it is, you'll see the insect there. Now this is one I saw on television on the Discovery Channel, and it's see the little white club there on the left-hand side or right-hand side. It is parasitized by, I don't even have the name of the species written down, and I always thought I'd have to go to the rainforest to see this mushroom. No, I went on a walk in South Carolina with some experienced mushroom hunters. One of them walked over to a holly bush, pulled it down, and goes, "There's one." I went, how do you do that? So, what happens is the ant gets infected on the ground, and the fungus, for whatever reason, drives the ant crazy and makes it climb. And it'll climb up a tree, and when it's sporulating from height, so the spores get dispersed better than if they were on the ground, 2 inches above the ground. They grow on most any kind of insect. It does make you think, what if that was me, Or if you don't like tarantulas, you probably like this fungus. That orange is the fungus. And this is a sphinx moth. It's been it killed the moth, embalmed it. Fungus is inside the moth. All those clubs you see are the fruiting bodies. And back to the movie again, or the video game. If you use your imagination, this is what you'd come up with. But it's an interesting niche that these fungi have taken up. Okay, I mentioned the chanterelle, smooth underside or real rough, rounded gills. This has much sharp-edged gills. The name jack-o'-lantern comes from the fact that it's bioluminescent. So it'll show up in, July through October. On the stumps, on wood or buried wood, chanterelles grow on the ground. Jack-o'-lanterns are larger, generally, and they often grow in big clusters. Chanterelles might grow in a cluster of 2 or 3. And that would be it. And what glows is this part, the underside of the mushroom. So you get the mushroom, it's poisonous, so you might not want to even take it home. But you take it home, go into your darkest closet, no ambient light, and give your eyes a minute or two, and you'll be able to see each of those gills glowing like a light in there, like a firefly. Has a wonderful smell, but not edible. I talked to a woman who ate some of these, and about an hour after she ate them, she went blind. I don't know that that's verifiable, just an anecdote. Her vision came back, obviously. And this is from the New York Times, taken with the light of the mushroom. And then there's honey mushrooms. There's several species, one of which is honey colored, and you can eat this one, mostly just the young caps, well cooked. Now this is another picture I'm showing you of an actual fungus. This is what produces what you just saw. This is the actual, often under the ground or in the log, and when it starts out, it's not black, it's white. They sometimes call it a shoestring fungus because you'll see the strands going from tree to tree. It's a tree killer, and it continues to grow on the dead wood. It is interesting also because the mushroom is not bioluminescent. The fruiting body isn't. And these strands, if they were white, are luminescent. And they grow in the wood, so it makes the wood look like it's glowing. So people give it the name foxfire. Another honey mushroom. This one likes birch and hemlock. And then there's the stinkhorns. They do stink. They smell horrible. If I had one up here, the people in the front row would be moving back. It'd be pretty strong. It's claimed it smells like carrion. I disagree, but it certainly isn't pleasant. And the odor is in that green slime. The actual mushroom does not stink. The slime has the spores. Insects come up and lap it up and carry the mushroom spores to another wood chip pile, to another area. That's sometimes called the dog stinkhorn. They're all phallic in one way or another. Almost all of them are. And then there's even the genus is Phallus. And Ravenellii got this mushroom named after him. I'm not so sure he was pleased. But anyhow, it is one you literally can smell before you find it. In the egg stage, which is under the ground, that egg is edible. It's not toxic in any way, but you just wouldn't. Kind of like eating a durian. If any of you have eaten durian, they taste okay, but they don't smell good. And Mother Nature will put a skirt on them sometimes. This one, the skirt is collapsed. There's a skirt intact. And as I mentioned, flies, carrion beetles, whatever will come up and clean that slime off. Now, when Richard Nixon went to China, that's what they served him at a dinner because it's phallic. He's a powerful man, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. A little sexist, but why not? Coral mushrooms. Kind of avoid these unless you really know what they are and you're going to need chemicals, microscope, maybe even DNA to identify them. Most of them probably aren't going to make you very sick, but some will give you diarrhea. And they come, as you can see, in a rainbow of colors. This is a posed picture. They didn't come up like that. Okay, there's Gymnopolis spectabilis, Gymnopolis luteus. Both smell wonderful, like almond extract or cherries. Very fragrant smell, very bitter taste. And if you took this mushroom downtown Wheeling and offered it for sale, you would be arrested because it contains a controlled substance called psilocin and psilocybin. And it's not a real popular hallucinogen because it's bitter. I've eaten it once. I grew up in the 60s, folk. I'm willing to try things. It was hard to get it down. And the next time I had a regular dish of mushrooms, like Pavlov, I went up to eat the mushroom and I could hardly put it in my mouth, even though it wasn't bitter. So I was conditioned. One of my favorite stories. I was so bitter that I don't know how people eat it without putting honey or sugar or something on it. A woman in Ohio, this came back in about 1943 in the Scientific Journal, and then brought again to the common people in an Audubon field guide. A woman ate these mushrooms thinking they were honey mushrooms. She had no taste buds, I'm convinced. And about an hour after she ate them, she started acting not like herself. She was giggling and squealing and laughing and I don't know what all, but her friends who were with her knew she'd eaten a wild mushroom and knew this was not the woman that they knew. So they insisted she go to the doctor or the hospital, I don't know which. And she fought them on it. She said, "I'm fine." "No, you're not." So they took her to the hospital. And as they were putting her into the car, she turned to one and said, "Well, if this is dying of mushroom poisoning, I'm all for it." I like purple mushrooms just because they look nice and they're unusual. There's like hundreds of them that are, but every time you find a bright purple one, it's a treat. And the odors of mushrooms are interesting as well. And they smell like almost anything in your kitchen or in your bathroom. It's this one smells, well, I'll tell the story. I often hand people mushrooms and say, "What's it smell like to you?" Because it's subjective to smell things. And I gave one to a guy from Pennsylvania, and he smelled it, and he got agitated. He was stomping his foot trying to figure out what he had. And he said, "Don't tell me, don't tell me." He said, "I got it." I said, "Well, what does it smell like?" I said, "Stuff my wife puts on cake that I don't like." Coconut, folks, coconut. And then probably one of the most sought after, talked about, photographed, illustrated in children's books are the variety of fly agarics, called that because if you break them up in milk and put a little sugar in there, I've never done this, the flies will come up and it knocks them out, and they fall into the milk and drown. Now, the same thing happens with people. It knocks them out, and then they get a high energy stage, allegedly used to get soldiers to ramp up to go to war. The typical form here is this one. It's a yellowish and orange. Other places, they're red ones. And if you see these, you can go around the world and you'll hear the native peoples talk about the wonderful lady with the red hat and the white spots. And it's used by the Ojibwe Indians for their meditations. Now, it does make you sick if you want to be sick and high at the same time, but I guess that passes, or you can prepare it a certain way. I've never eaten this one and I have no desire to eat it. Interesting mushroom, though. Lots and lots of publicity because people often say it's deadly poisonous. It is not. The very first talk I gave on mushrooms was back in the 70s. And I had one of these and held it up in front of the audience. And I probably overemphasized how poisonous it was. And a guy stood up in the front row and said, "I take that mushroom." Took a big bite out of the mushroom. And I looked at him. I said, "Do you know what you're doing?" He said, "Isn't it the same as this one?" I said, "No, that one's edible. This one's not." So I don't think he got sick because he didn't eat very much. But I learned then, never trust your audience. So. And, we live in a culture where a few years ago, I don't know, maybe it's been 10 years ago, to keep the kids off the drugs, don't just say no, Well, this lady would make you say yes. This is taken in Kamchatka province of the old Soviet Union, Siberia, if you will. Notice the dress. She's holding up one, so you can look at her as a pharmacist or a drug dealer, depending on your perspective. And again, just say no. Maybe not. Let's break them in young. But it's true. Look at children's books. You'll see pictures of this mushroom. Also often on Christmas trees as an ornament. And for you ethnic folks, some of you may know that if you put a mushroom on your Christmas tree, it's good luck. And if you want to dye with mushrooms and then come back to tell your friends about it, you can dye yarn of all kinds, and the color of the yarn is not necessarily the color of the mushroom. You boil it in some kind of a mordant. So you can something acidic, something not acidic, and you come up with all these colors and all these various mushrooms. And I've seen hats, scarves, sweaters made from mushroom dyed yarn. And if you don't want to go in the woods, find yourself a really good farmer's market. I don't know if there is one in West Virginia or Ohio. You can get them at some of the upscale grocery stores, but you're not going to have this variety, and they don't come cheap. Now, one of the things I'd encourage you to do, I think I already mentioned this, if you're interested in mushrooms, Google West Virginia Mushroom Club, Ohio Mushroom Society, join, and go to these events where you're going to see lots and lots of kinds of mushrooms identified for you. And one of the values of this is you look at the plate and it says, or look it up in your book, it's got a name, you can look it up, and it says, edible choice, but looks like so-and-so. Well, if you don't have so-and-so, you're kind of up a creek, unless you read real careful. Well, the chances are when you get 100 kinds of mushrooms, you're going to have so-and-so as well. So you pick them up and look at them together, and the average 5-year-old could tell the difference. But just going by the picture and the notes, pretty difficult to do. So, and I can hawk my book here again. This is one of my books, $30 right down there. And a lot of the same pictures you're seeing here are going to be in the book. I've got thousands of them. Here are the spore prints that I mentioned earlier. These are chocolate almost, maybe a little darker, all from one kind of mushroom. I don't even know which one, probably agaricus. Okay, wrapping things up here. I'm cheating a little. How many of you saw the movie Fantastic Fungi? Oh, don't be shy. 1, 2, 3, that was several. You got hyped a little bit in that movie. It had beautiful fungi pictures, beautiful time-lapse pictures. Unfortunately, several of the time-lapse pictures were slime molds, different kinds. Mushrooms don't move, slime molds do. And mushrooms are much more solid than slime molds. If you pinched one of these, you'd get a pink toothpaste-like stuff coming out of it. And sometimes they're beautiful. And then you got the ones that are mobile. And you can see the stretch marks there. That's where it has moved. And it is the fastest amoeboid movement of any organism on the planet. So you can do it with a time-lapse photography. I don't do that. This is called a scrambled egg slime, or the lovely name of dog vomit slime. There was a woman in Texas, looked out on her yard, and there was this, and it was as big as a dishpan. It was huge. And she got concerned about it because she'd never seen it before and didn't know what it was. Had thoughts maybe it's an alien, who knows. She called the fire department. The fire department came out with a hose. Now this is like tapioca pudding. You can't pick it up. So the mold will, the water would just blow it to smithereens. And it's actually not a fungus, but it likes water just like a fungus. So what happened is it absorbed all that water and it got a lot bigger out in her yard. And it was in the shade or in the sun, which it didn't particularly care for. So there's no brain, but they just have instinct. And it moved on over into the shade. So when she looked out again, what was over there was now over here. And they called out the National Guard. Fortunately, I don't think they had the nuclear considerations, but they were able to call in some scientists who said, oh, it's eating bacteria and leaf mold. All the housewives of Houston, Texas are just fine. Again, not a fungus, but you'll see it in wood chips and wood mulch or in your yard. And in Mexico, they mix it up with scrambled eggs and eat it. Oh, well, eggs are not exactly lovely either. It's all how you're brought up. So get out there in the woods. That's why my field guide is huge, is that you take the mushrooms home that you're interested in and do your working at the kitchen table or wherever, in the dining room, living room, wherever. Or you can take a little book and carry it with you in the field, but you won't know the spore color, et cetera, et cetera. So they're both good. They're both popular books. And I get a lot of compliments on them, so I'm proud of my work. Their mushrooms are just beautiful. They have nice structures. At least I think they're beautiful. This is a West Virginia picture. of one of the wax caps. Don't let them eat you. That's all, folks. Thank you very much. I'll take questions if you have them. Any questions? Speak loud because I'm hard of hearing. Now you're a star.
I guess so. So I'm going down to Deep Creek, Maryland next week. Which ones should I be looking for?
Morels, oyster mushrooms,
Okay.
and wine caps.
Wine caps. Okay.
Those are in wood chips.
Right. I know
Morels.
there's a lot of hemlocks around there. So
Not especially good, but they
Right.
grow wherever they want to. Now, for 30 years, I bring morels home and briefly soak them, take them out, dry them. I throw the water in the yard because I'd heard that might work to bring them up because the spores come out in the water. Well, it took 30 years, but all of a sudden I had morels in my yard and I've had them the last 4 years running. So, but the morels you're probably going to see are the black morels, although mine come out early and they're the yellow ones. No other questions? Okay.
we've got one more back here.
We had morels at our farm and we cooked them, like you said, in a cast iron skillet. That's the best way. But finding them was tricky, and I wondered if you could tell me what time of the year and what time of the day is the best time to
Time of
look?
day doesn't matter unless it's dark.
Okay.
But time of the year is from now till the second week in May. And of course, the further north you go, the later you can get them. I've seen them in June up on Lake Erie.
Right.
And some people take their camper down to Florida in February and gradually move north, hunting morels.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Chuck, you're plenty loud, right?
What safety precautions, if any, should you use when you're collecting mushrooms?
You need a permit if you're collecting on private land. You need them to give you permission.
But gloves or anything like that is okay? Bare hands, gloves?
Ticks. And they've become a bigger problem since I was a child when I spent lots of time in briar patches and woods, and I never heard of a tick. Now I go mushroom morel hunting, and if I get into some tall grass or tall weeds, I have to check myself pretty good. I do treat my clothing with permethrin, which is a chemical you can buy. You don't put it on you, you put it on your clothes, and it'll last through a couple washings. And it works pretty well. No, you can touch them, put them in your refrigerator, do what you want with them. If you don't ingest them, yeah, that's okay. I don't recommend it for people because you might swallow some by mistake. Now I do it all the time, but I don't spit test the amanitas because I know they could be bad news. Yeah, those are bitter sometimes, very bitter. Thought I saw a hand on the right side. Did I? Nope. Yes, sir. Simply morels floured and fried. Very simple dish. But you don't need the flour. I just like it because it makes them a little crisp. You don't get too much on.
Yes, Walter, are you familiar with dry saddle? I see them all over the place here.
They smell like cucumber.
Yeah. Have you or anyone you know eaten them?
They're edible, but you got to get them when they're young. And some people say before the pores open up, but I just say get them young. The older they get, the tougher they get. And cut them in small strips and fry them again like bacon. Get them crisp.
I noticed that the deer will take one bite out of them and leave the rest alone.
They don't like cucumbers, I guess. That's it. No more. Last chance. Thank you very much.